Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, I guess I'm up. It's official now. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashok Sinha. I'm based in New York, but I'm here to talk about a project I did that is based in Los Angeles. And I'll talk a little bit more about the project itself and how I got there. And hopefully you'll get some nuggets of information and maybe help with your own projects. So as a photographer, I shoot primarily, well, I started off as editorial photographer, but I shoot a lot of architecture these days. And it's a manifestation of my work. So here we go. So that's my book called Gas and Glamour. I started off with this slide because just want to show you that I was lucky enough to get some attention for this book, but that's not the purpose of this lecture. The purpose of the lecture is how did I get there and what it took and what kind of stuff kind of helped me or didn't help me to get there. So a little background about the book. Like I said, I love the mid-century. I love the time when this country is going through a big amount of change in terms of cars and highways, and nowhere more was more apparent than Los Angeles, the original city, car mecca, car culture, whatever it may be. I love cars myself, and so I've always wanted to do a project about cars and Los Angeles, which I also have a big connection with. But as an architectural photographer, I wanted to make the two connections. And so I started exploring how these two things came together in a city like Los Angeles. So the beginnings of the project essentially started off. So I do this on a couple of levels because the top one is the LA most of us know, right? The LA of highways and exits and whatnot. But the real Los Angeles, which I got to know for many, many years now, is the LA of the surface streets. For some of you who might know of it or might be from Los Angeles, you're probably aware that these massive boulevards that go through the city, literally, and I know LA before, not to date myself, before Google Maps, so I know the map really well, reading the map. So you could take these streets and go from one side of the city to the other and really find out these little towns that are interconnected. And while you drive through these streets, you actually come across out of nowhere, these buildings from a different era, from literally the mid-century. And you always wonder why it's there and what is this crazy design called and why was it made that way. And one of the architecture elements is googie. It's a funny word. It started off with a design of a coffee shop, and it was made fun of by the architects of the time. And they said, oh, we're going to call it googie, like a fun way, like a kind of a sort of not a nice way. And the world of Jetsons and whatnot played into that architecture, the space age architecture. So my project spanned 4 years only because I'm based in New York. I go to LA like about 3 times a year. So I spent those years in mapping out these locations. I drove a lot of miles. I made a lot of images. And I used a lot of, I did a lot of scouting on Google Maps because I didn't have, every time I'd go, I didn't have the luxury of real-time scouting. But often I found out that my Google Maps was only so good because the best vantage point was in the middle of this 4-lane street, which I couldn't possibly be on. But it always gives you a sense of what the building is, where the light's going to come from, that kind of stuff, and you can make some educated guesses. So right on to the images. The first image I made for this book was this drive-through, basically a coffee shop, donut shop called the Donut Hole. And it's a very interesting building because it's actually the product that's being sold. It's a whole thing about these kind of buildings called, this architecture called programmatic architecture. You probably have seen the Randy's Donuts in many movies and whatnot. Essentially, this one had the big donut, and it's quite a thing to drive through it and experience this donut in real life. Then obviously, this is the oldest McDonald's that are still operational in the States. It was built in 1953, and it's in the city of Downey in Los Angeles. And these characteristic characteristic arches that we know of. And again, the design element, so all these buildings were designed in a way, so when you were driving by these streets at 35, 40 miles an hour, they had some kind of a thing that drew you into them. So for the donut, of course, the donut, you want to drive through it. For the McDonald's, it was this showcase of their assembly style making of hamburgers and their walk-up drive-through stands. And then, again, the use of typography, use of neon, everything played part into how a motorist would see the city through the car, and how architecture essentially was a form of advertising. So you can see this, when I went and photographed these. Again, these were photographed in a very formal manner, like the way I do my commercial projects. So again, for the photo people out here, which all of us are, shot with tilt shift lenses and many exposures and whatnot. Then there are things like these coffee shops, a classic California coffee shop like the Chips. And again, you see the design nuances. The letters Chips are angled at the direction of traffic. So when you drive by it, you can read the name very clearly. And again, the corner of it, they call it the space age cacti. If it's a left turn you make, and when you make the left turn, you see the word Chips right in front of you. Again, the use of glass, the use of warm lighting, everything played a role into the design element of what drew you into this coffee shop. This was a famous architect, and he's a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, and a lot of the works and the design elements you can see in his work. His name is Harry Harrison. Then that's the interior. I shot some of the interiors of these places because they were just interesting, and I wanted to add a sense of diversity to the images as well as how it felt to be inside. There were things like Pan's, which is a coffee shop in actually a traffic island, and it was built as an oasis in a traffic island with the use of greenery and, again, glass, the space age signage, the Pan's lights up and it moves at night. All these kind of things played an important role as to how this building was positioned and how you saw it when you were going back home or in the morning. That's the interior. Those, the banquettes. These are just amazing. And by the way, these are all operational businesses, so none of these are sort of relics. These are actual living, breathing businesses. Norms is another one, which had, again, the characteristic signage. The letters light up. It's a very difficult thing to photograph neon. So you had to photograph the letters separately in composite. So all these images are mostly composites. So this is not, just to let you know, this is not a one-shot deal. This is well thought out, composited for specific elements coming together and making into a picture. But other than that, everything else is real. It's just the technique is a composite technique. So I wanted to also include pictures as to how you would perceive it as a driver. And I precisely chose a modern day car. I didn't want to rent a car from that time because I also wanted to give the sense of the reader that this is the present. This is not something you're looking back in the day. This is how you would perceive it today. In fact, some of these images in the book have in your dash GPS overlaid onto the architecture. This is an interesting place. It's in Burbank, and they have this every Friday night. They have an auto show where a lot of people come. Again, most of these places actually were, again, places of gathering for the community. So it was not only just a coffee shop. It was a place for people to be seen, to meet other people. This one, Jay Leno shows up once in a while. If you see his YouTube or Instagram, you'll see he comes around with his cars, depending on which one. And you get to meet all the people. And again, that signage was a big draw as to why people came in and how it was designed. Again, programmatic architecture, in this case, Idle Hour. It's kind of funny. It's actually a bar. It's a whiskey barrel, and it's called Idle Hour. They had this massive whiskey barrel built into this structure. And again, that was the draw as to why this bar existed the way it did. And then funny things like this. This is actually a strip mall called the Fleetwood Center. It's a Cadillac Fleetwood. If you look closely, let me show you. If you haven't noticed already, these are the tires, right? Obviously the headlights, the fender, and all that, that's the Cadillac sign. Never had a car dealership. It was always a strip mall. I was always curious as to what this was. I went there a few times, never saw a person, never saw the blind closed, but it's one of those things you get into while you're, quirky kind of things. So this was, again, in the middle of Ventura Boulevard. You drive down, you see buildings, normal buildings, and you see this one. You're like, what is going on here? It used to be Pepto Pink, which was first built. Now it's kind of bland white, but I think I prefer Pepto Pink. Speaking of cars, car dealerships were one of a kind. Nowadays we assume car dealerships to have this design of showcasing the car, and you want to go and buy the car. But that was revolutionary. This is from 1949. It was built by a Hollywood set designer, and this was the first time they came up with this design of bringing the inside out and showing you what's inside. And if you go inside, there are planners and whatnot, gives you a sense of Hawaii or whatever you are, and it's an experience. And it's exactly that. Those letters are is exactly a 1949 Cadillac. So there were, like I said, typography, everything played a role into how these things were built. And so I started noticing these things more and more as I went about photographing them. It was quite a thing, and tried to explain to that when I was photographing to somebody, say, why is this guy interested in this? And then you start talking, and then you make a connection. That's the way it goes. So that's why it took 4 years. Again, one of my favorite pictures is this gas station in Beverly Hills. It was built by the same architect. It was originally built for the Los Angeles International Terminal, but it didn't get built in it. It didn't feature in the master plan, so it eventually became a gas station canopy in Beverly Hills. We call it, it took flight in Beverly Hills. It's the Union 76 gas station, the most expensive gas you can buy in Los Angeles, but it's worth it because you can stand around as long as you want and go drip, drip very slowly, like admiring the thing. So it's worth the price of admission, let's put it that way. It's beautifully built. It has so many things going for it. The UFO vibes, the red squares and the lighting and the positioning. I mean, that's how gas stations should be. Anyway, other quirky things, or not so quirky things. LA is filled with car washes, and there's a kind of a resurgence of bringing these car washes back. But there are many that are going by the wayside and nobody cares about them. One of them is by the airport. And again, the use of letters and signage and these, kind of these crazy structures that are rising above the car wash. I mean, who does that? But it was just ornamental. It was just meant to be done because they wanted your attention when you were driving by. Drew my attention for sure. And then this one, again, built like these steel trusses that are going down and these big letters. And you cannot miss this thing. So, these designers were definitely thinking as to how to make these things special. This is a very interesting building. This is the only surviving drive-through dairy in Los Angeles. So when it was first built in the mid-century, there was a one-page, I actually found the full-page ad in LA Times. It was called A Wonder of Architecture. And it was like, this is the thing. This is a Driftwood Dairy. The dairy still exists. And there's that drive-through. They sell more things than just milk and dairy. But it's this huge parabolic curve structure that goes across the space, and you're just buying milk, but it's an experience. So, they paid attention to these things, and then the dairy being right behind it, normally you would drift into the Driftwood Dairy. So that was a thing about not only design, the use of colors, the positioning of it, everything played a role in this building. Again, more arches, bowling alleys was a big thing to bring in the mid-century when a lot of people moving to the suburbs. There had to be places where people would come together. So bowling alleys was like a kind of like given. It's a thing. And people would go there. But then how do you make it interesting? Would you build a box and you put some bowling lanes? No, of course not. This is like the time of like optimism. This is like space age America. Build those big signs and big arches and whatnot, and then you have a bowling alley. And now you go into the bowling alley, you'll remember that bowling alley because when you walk in there, you walk through that thing. It's like walking through a disco and all these lights going on and these kind of crazy things. So, again, it's crazy. It's extravagant. It's whatever you call it, but it is definitely an attention grabber. Moving on to another subject matter in the book is these motels. And this is in Pasadena. Some of the things I want to point out, the use of, again, typography. The Moorish sign is unique. It was made for this hotel. And then the carport was something that was new, that was revolutionary to drive your car right through. And then, I have stories where I went to photograph this and I went one day because, these images, by the way, didn't happen when I showed up and it happened. I wish it did. But in this case, for example, when I went to shoot it, there was a long line across and right in front of the sidewalk in this motel. And I was like, what was going on? So I asked some of them and I said, oh, didn't you know they're giving away free pizza? I'm like, really? Oh. Apparently there's a pizza joint, a New York style pizza joint opening up right around the corner. And all the kids from college were like lining up for that free pizza. So that shoot was done. I couldn't shoot it that day. I came back, the weather was not right because I also wanted to have a certain, so all these were done one image at a time. So the sky was not to my liking, so I had to go back. Didn't happen. So I came back when everything was kind of right, and I was waiting for that one car to show up, and it took me a long time for that one car to show up. So that's when I said, the only way to preserve these buildings is to have more business. And how can I do more business and make a damn book about it, and so people can go see these places and have more business? I mean, that's preservation for you, right? I waited for that car to show up, and it had an epiphany, because when you have nothing else going on, you think of things, right? And you're like waiting for this car, and you almost forget why you're waiting in the first place. After making all the exposures for everything and waiting, I said, I'm happy, and I made it, and great, done. So the saga was always going to be special for me for that reason, because a lot of things were happening in my head. And the way and again, the wigwam is a crazy one. There are obviously this crazy, it's not PC these days, but they did do these things. And it's kind of an experience to stay in one of these. But it exists. My point is, again, the time of day, the choice was that if you look at the book, it's laid out from dusk to night. So the color of the sky is the way I threaded the series, and I talk about that because sometimes you wonder what comes first in the picture or in the series. What should be my story? Of course, there's a story, but how do you thread it together visually, and what makes sense? I think that's the end of the images. Oh, there's one more. The motel, another one in North Hollywood. One of these are going away very fast, and you can tell that test of time where you see those two arrows are competing. So it used to be entry, and now it's the exit. So stuff like that. All right, so those are the images. I think I'm done. No, okay, getting ready. So how did it start? What I want to talk about now is how can you think of and how I thought about my project and got about it. So first thing is obviously the project statement. It took a while to come up with this statement. Stuff like, even a talk like this has to have a statement. And when you do a project, even if it's like one paragraph, that helped solidify what I was going to work on. So for me was Los Angeles. For me was everything related to cars, architecture, and had to be a living, breathing business. I just set parameters. And why, more importantly, I was drawn to it. So I think my essay in the book was like, I love cars and I love the city of cars. So I think those were my first two words in my project statement. So whenever I saw someone, everybody asked me, why are you doing this? And I could tell them in 2 sentences, this is why I'm doing this, because I'm a car guy and I love it, and I love architecture, I love LA, and that's it. And then everything you say can come after to make it formalized. And then a pitch deck. So I did do a pitch deck because obviously we're all visual people here. As much as we love words, I think when you're talking to a publisher or someone, you all need to put together, or we have to put together some kind of a visual manifestation. It doesn't have to be your images, by the way. I think it's a big mistake out there. You have to go out and shoot. No, it could be like a mood board. It could be things you see in movies and in billboards and advertising and whatnot. And you can say, this is the kind of style of thing I'm going to do. I do it all for my commercial projects. I do put mood boards together, but it gives the viewer a sense of how do you think visually and what you're kind of going after. Then research on similar titles. I spent a long time going to bookshops, Barnes & Noble and whatnot, going to book fairs to see what's out there. And trust me, I also did overthink it and almost killed the project. Thank God I didn't, because someone came to my rescue. But it gave me a sense of how my book will be different than what's out there. I mean, you can make a same book. At the end of the day, it'll still be your voice. But if you have a sense of what's out there, maybe you'll be a smarter creator, and you'll think okay, I have a different spin to it. Finding collaborators is a key. If I would do this all over again, I would find collaborators early on in the process than I did. So what do I mean by collaborators? Photo editor. We all think we are great editors of our work. We're not. You might have a good sense of editing, but a fresh pair of eyes will always give you that perspective that you may not have. You want to find people who will write your essays or even a project statement for you if you're not a great writer. Someone who's a writer, someone who's an English teacher, whoever it may be, but not a photographer, could be a good person. Someone who is going to write your captions for your images. collaborator. Someone who is in design, how are you going to do the mock-up and show it to somebody? So if you have a designer friend, that could be he or she could be a good collaborator. So things like that. Start thinking about people you can work with. And then publishing. When it came to publishing, there's obviously two routes. You can go self-publishing. You have the Amazon route. If you're somebody who has a great following on social, probably it makes sense for you to self-publish and bypass the publisher. Or maybe it's too overwhelming for you that you want to go traditional publishing. And there are pros and cons to each, but keep in mind that the publisher does bring a lot to the table. It is a little bit of a process, and self-publishing is kind of immediate gratification to a certain extent. I mean, Andy Warhol, I don't think ever, it's all mostly self-published books, but you have to be that persona. You have to have that kind of audience to go that route. Finding publishers. So a great way to find publishers is, again, when you do the research on titles, you can kind of get a sense of which publisher is kind of interested in what kind of topics. You won't go to a publisher who's publishing, say, fiction to go with your photo book essay pitch, because it would be a waste of time. The other thing you can do, which I did, was I went to portfolio reviews, where there are a lot of publishers. You can meet sets of people that you would want to show your project with and give a sense of which publishers. I met people like myself who have published books before to get a sense of who could be interested in this. And then you want to go niche, you want to go a local publisher who does very arty books to a larger one. I mean, I went to a larger one because my topic, again, it was a crossroads whether I want to go, my topic would be design audience or general audience. I went general audience because I wanted to have the sense of this book being approachable by everybody, so I went with a larger publisher. And then budget considerations is a big one because, again, look, as much as we want our projects to be funded fully, it doesn't happen. That's the dirty secret of publishing. So you have to have a budget, even if you're self-publishing or going with a publisher. Chances are, if you're not a superstar, they're not going to make an advance to you. And even if you are, in art book publishing, there's rarely an advance. So you have to consider what this project is going to cost you, how much the publisher is going to put in to the cost, and what's the difference, and how are you going to fund it. And that's the way you should think about it, whether it's a self-published book or a published book or a publisher route. Distribution strategy, like I said, if you have a following and you can just put a tweet or a post and you can sell 1,000 books, great. That's one of your pointers on the distribution strategy. But when you choose a publisher, you want to be very careful as to, or consider at least, who are these people that are buying from this publisher? What are the distribution houses they're going to? And where are my books going to be? Is it going to be if you care about being in Barnes & Noble, then yeah, you have to put that in consideration. If you don't care, and if it's in a very art-focused book fair, that's fine, depending on the subject matter, but this is something you have to think about. Fundraising, that's my ugly face, and doing a video, I had to do it, trust me, it's not pretty. It's pretty self-consuming. You have to think of a pitch deck, a pitch video is necessary this day and age, no matter what you do. Even if it's an Instagram post, you have to have that kind of personal connection that happens through a pitch. And in my case, I did part of it was crowdfunding, which is a whole other job to begin with, but you have to do it, and you have to do it in a nice way, like it looks kind of fun and people want to watch it. I mean, mom might like it, maybe. That kind of stuff. And then crowdfunding is kind of, if you're willing to put in the time, if you have things, I will only say it in interest time, don't go crazy with your incentives. Have simple incentives. Don't have like 10 different tiers of crowdfunded contributions. Have like 4. Easier to manage, because when it comes to shipping those things out, you got to hire someone. Keep that in mind. Brand corporate sponsorship, for me, that worked a lot. That worked out really well. So in my case, I work with a fashion brand. Think of outside the box. A fashion brand based in West Hollywood who were right on brand, and they did this whole thing for them was California brand culture. And they're based out of West Hollywood, but they are bigger, and their corporate office is now in Japan. So I met them, and they reached out to me about this book project. So it ended up being, long story short, they funded pretty much most of the book. And they also did a year-long exhibition in Japan in all their stores and whatnot. So another thing to consider is don't just look into traditional ways. Think of other brands that might be interested in your topic or the subject matter and try to find ways to reach out to them. If there are media inquiries, you can make that kind of stuff. And again, the pitch deck will come in handy, the video will come in handy, so all those things will come in handy when you reach out and you look more professional. Production. I talked about collaborators. In this case, the collaborator for production is a little different because it's more design-based. So in my case, I have a printer I work with on my fine art work, and he was great. He could produce. So this book was produced in the height of the pandemic. So unfortunately, I couldn't go to Germany to be on press, which is one of the great perks to work with a publisher, to be on press, and they have an original Heidelberg press on the premises. So that was a bummer. But we did these mock-up prints in New York, and so since he's a master colorist, we would send them proofs from New York saying that, we want to as close as match possible. And then they would send us back. So you see the watermark picture, that's like the background picture. That's what they would send back to us as to renditions of the book. And sometimes we say, oh, the black is too much, or, I didn't nitpick that much, but sometimes. Design considerations is to how do you want the pictures to be laid out? How you want the images? Like in my case, I wanted the pictures to do the talking. So the pictures had to be like a full page. The text was minimal. I only had 3 essays, one by me, one by a curator, and one by an architect. And it has a magazine-y style caption, so you have to think of what you want to do. One cool thing we did was we have this in the book. In the back of the book, we have these QR codes with all these locations. So you can use Google Maps to go visit these places. And a lot of times when people buy the book, they actually use it as a guidebook to go to LA and see LA in a different way. So you can put a map and you can drive around and see all the places in the book. So that came upon by a collaborative way with the publisher. Size and pages, again, is related to the budget, but also how do you want the book to be placed? If you close your eyes and said, oh, I want the book to be this big on the coffee table, I want it to be this thick, you just have to have an idea, whether it's a portrait book or a landscape book. You don't have to have exact answers, but some ideas obviously helpful. Price point is another thing that the publisher will help you with, or if you do your research, you kind of get a sense of what prices are at. I mean, obviously, pricing art is probably the toughest thing, and the same thing with the book. But because the publisher in this case has such a vast knowledge of what really works in this realm, they'll give you a range of prices, and they'll say, okay, this is the price. I mean, in my case, it was like $50 or whatever. So they said that should be the price, and they set the price. Outreach. This is one form of outreach. Talking about it. I talked about it extensively. Especially, I do less of it. But now that the book is officially in second edition, I'm starting to do it again because the first edition sold out and it was successful. And so the publisher did a second edition. So they want me to do some signings, they want to do some talks, and I'll start that again in the spring. So that's a big part of also not only just pure selling the book, but again, meeting like-minded people, collaborators. You never know what might come out of it. Exhibitions, I did some exhibitions at the Center for Book Arts here. I talked about that exhibition I did in Japan for a whole year. There were other smaller exhibitions, group shows that we're part of. I did art fairs in New York, which brought a whole other set of collectors. I did some work in Palm Springs. That is just your art form and your art that came from the book. And it's, again, another audience, and you can offer them the book as an incentive or as a thank you to a collector. Editorial. There were a bunch of editorial stories. I showed you the first slide. There were stories made from the book by the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, Los Angeles Magazine. And they not only put the book on their list of top picks for the year, they also made stories about it. So that is something you can, when you have a project like this, even if it's not done yet, again, going back to that project statement will help you in lining up those collaborators, in this case, the editors, to say, hey, I'm working on this project and it's almost half done. I'd like to talk about it, and maybe someday we can work together. I won't put them on the spot, but I'll just kind of get a sense of where things are at. And you never know. If they like the project, they will come back and say, hey, I want to do a story about it. That's what happened with me. Awards, I submitted to a lot of awards. I mean, I didn't care if I won or not, but my whole point was my book got seen. There were things that happened to the awards that somebody said, oh, I saw it in the submission and made the finalist. It didn't win, but I really like your work. We'd love to work together. So again, it's not just about the win or losing. It's about getting it out there as much as possible. And then think outside the box. So I wanted to put that in because you see that background picture. So this book was a billboard for the entire summer in front of Staples Center in Los Angeles. So, it was like a moving billboard. And it was so cool to see all the pictures. And I think they had 6, but not all. But anyway, my point is it had all the pictures as a billboard. And again, came through a collaboration with the curator, producer I work with, and just talking about it. And I said, oh, I'm a curator for this. And we love artist books. And we do this every month or every other month, and your book will be great because it's LA, and blah, blah, blah. Can you do this? I'm like, yeah, that's great. And a lot of people who thought I was joking about this project actually said, oh, this is for real. Especially my family in LA. Anyway, what's next? What is next? New edition, like I said, it's already here. So we're already in the next part. We're in the future. It came out in January. I think the publisher has said it's been a successful project and they want to make a bigger run of it. This one's a very new one, NFT, which I never thought I would actually put that on the slide, but I did because I was very skeptical about NFTs, although I did want to be with the cool kids, so I wanted to learn what this NFT thing was about, right? I don't want to say I don't know about NFTs. Of course I do. But after all that reading, it didn't really sway me in one way or the other, because I felt like, I would be in a mass sea of NFTs and who knows. But then this platform reached out to me, who was a curated NFT platform, and they wanted to release a few of them as NFTs. We released 6, I think 1 sold already, which is crazy, at a crazy price, by an amazing collector who's very, very well known. So I would have, if nothing else sells, I'd be happy because, that one collector alone is a gem. And to me, to be in that space, to have that discussion, have that talk, and even to know a little bit about how this works, literally took me like a day to make my MetaMask wallet, don't tell anybody, to the point where what is going on? What is this thing? And putting all that stuff. So it was a good process, and then I found out that you can do all these things with the book, with the cover of the book. The collector actually collects cover images. That's his thing. So for the future, got some ideas there. A film is in the works. We're writing a treatment for it about, part of the book is about the people that you don't see in the book, but, since I'm a filmmaker, I work with a production team. We're writing a treatment for this, and there's been some interest there. So again, back to the fundraising route and whatnot, but there's a life beyond just a book. Digital media, so, those, the map that I talked about, there's also works of make it into a digital kind of a thing, so you can kind of see this book in a different realm and learn about these places and make something out of it. It's still in the works. We're talking to a bunch of people, and we'll see what happens. So that's the website for the book, gasandglamour.com. It's one page on my website. Since we sold out of the first edition, it doesn't have a e-commerce site anymore. We killed that. So I just have my personal few copies, and I have some here. But we don't have that. But you can go, when you go to that website, you can actually see a full run-through of the book, every page. You can see, if you're inclined, you can listen to some of the talks. I put, I think, 3 or 4 of them. And I think that's about it. And that's my Instagram, and that's my website, and that's it. And if you have questions, go for it. Okay, sorry, move back first.
When you approach publishers and you mentioned that they expect you to foot part of the budget, what kind of numbers were they talking? Half the budget, 10%, good faith? What sort of parameters?
In my case, I actually came up with a percentage that I could afford if nothing came through. But I always said that the publisher had to have a skin in the game. So I wouldn't do 100% funding on my own, because if they didn't have some skin in the game, then this book, they could care less whether this would be successful or not. I was worried. I kind of agreed to a percentage that I would be comfortable with, funded by a commercial project, but at the same time I was having the discussion with this partner as part of this other project to say, hey, could you fund this? And we could come to an agreement. So there's not hard numbers, but I think it was a mental percentage that I agreed to myself that I would do.
Thank you.
Sure.
What role did the businesses themselves have proprietary claims over the image of their establishment, or do they want to promote it, get copies, and maybe, hey, this is good for our business, we can help spread the word? I mean, did they have any role whatsoever?
No, I mean, in a way, the short answer is no. But at the same time, a lot of them, there are some of them that got a lot of press because of the book through the LA Conservancy, because they ran a lot of stuff with people going and seeing these places. I followed up with a couple of businesses because I was close to them, and there's a whole manifestation that happens now. Well, I'm not going to take credit because of the book, but there's a whole fan following of this sort of architecture in Los Angeles and beyond. And this book is prominently featured in all those things. So whenever we go, we talk about this stuff, and people say, oh yeah, we've come across it. A lot of people come with this book kind of thing, drive through it. Some crazy guys just drive through the donut all the time,
Did the LA Times do a piece on you?
Los Angeles Magazine.
Magazine?
Yeah. They put it, the timing was right because they put it in so the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Magazine, and both of them did the top book of 2020, holiday book. So that was a lot of press on both coasts that really helped, I would hope, in turn.
How many books is a sellout? I mean, what did
I think the run was 10,000 maybe?
10,000 copies?
Yeah, something like that. Not much. Yeah, go in the back. I'll come back to you. Go for it.
I was curious if you have any advice on how you brainstorm with brands to approach to work with you on funding, and then after you had a time of working with, how did you approach them? Did you cold contact them? Did you have connections with them?
Right. So for me was a few things. I said automotive, right? Anything related to automotive, lifestyle, right? Architecture, which I didn't get any kind of thing. Advertising, people who were playing in that space as to who would be interested. But the lifestyle aspect of it, because I said, it's not a direct, so the other things I was looking at was an auto insurance company who does a lot of insurance for classic, like collectible cars. That went pretty far, and then we didn't do it. But I reached out to a lot of the media people that worked with media. I proposed something to even the Visit Los Angeles tourism. Nobody got back to me. That's fine, And they got back to me eventually, but it was too late because I said I already have done it. Because they saw this billboard and they say, oh, we want to do something. I'm like, but I can't give you first dibs because it's already done. Where were you when I called you? So you have to be okay with not having kind of an ego over it. Like you have to be okay with denial, just no's, which we all are, of course. But I think you find the brands, and more importantly, this brand especially was interested in my fine art work, which I do with a gallery. So they looked me up, and they actually came from Japan to meet me, which I found out when she came. I was like, you came to Japan to meet me? It's kind of crazy. But because it was a long-term relationship, they really wanted to make sure that I was the right guy. I was real, and I was sincere. So I think outreach initially, direct, like without knowing anyone, and then, double-pronged or triple-pronged approach to reaching out the same kind of people or department within the company you want to work with. And like I said, be okay with a no.
Two quick questions. As far as approaching publishers, did you have an agent when you were doing that, or are publishers more open to photographers?
There are book agents. I considered having a book agent, and I was kind of this close, but I also wanted to kind of try it out. So I knew of a few publishers I've seen, I go to a lot of photo salon kind of things where we just talk about work, and people have, people always say good or bad things about their experiences, more bad than good. So I knew which ones to avoid. And I didn't want to get into a relationship like that, a bad relationship. And then I knew some publishers who were serious, and then my book was published with Saul later. I'm like, the same page? I'm like, I've made it, that's it, I don't need anything else, So they were working with very serious photographers that I admire, and so that was pretty much an easy choice. And sorry, that's, yeah.
Second, quick question about the photographs. So you mentioned exposure bracketing, almost every single one of your photos.
Yes.
Like that McDonald's photo, for example, how many different exposures did you have to take to composite?
Well, Hannah goes to all my commercial shoots, so she'll tell you. But I would say we shot the neon separately. We shot all the shadows, highlights separately. We shot the sky, people separately, that kind of stuff. So it depends. Sorry, you were raising up. I'll come back to you.
You were saying earlier about finding portfolio reviews. How do you find a portfolio reviewer?
Oh, the best one to attend, and I'll tell you because I work for them and I love them, is the New York Times Portfolio Review. Oh, how do you find portfolio reviews? New York Times is a free portfolio review every year. You should all apply for it, even if you don't get in. I applied for 5 years. I eventually got in 1 year. But it has the best collection of people you can imagine. It's free. Now, there are other portfolio reviews that are not free. B&H has a great, plug, David. But I would say that I've met amazing photographers you would never see or expect that happen to be in New York, because we got to use New York. And B&H, I don't know if you guys are doing portfolio reviews, but B&H, every event they do a portfolio review. I've met people in reviews. There's Photo Plus that happens. There is Photo Works, which is more commercial based. There's Santa Fe. There's one website that gives you the whole rundown. But there's a website which is free service called Diversify Photo, which I'm a member of, diversify.photo. They're great people. I'm a member, I'm a proud member of it, and there's a whole list. I see another of my people there. Yes, so there's a list of all these portfolio reviews that you can just look at the list, and they're all vetted, respectable reviews. So.
For your work now, is it mostly you reaching out to people, or are you at a level now where you're so good that everyone's just reaching out to you? Or is it a good mix?
I think it's a mix. I think credibility is important, but I think something like this, a book being out there, there's a lot of people that reach out because they've seen the book, and people from different, not photo related, some other tie-ups would reach out, and then editorially, when this book was featured editorially, I got a lot of inbound stuff. My reach out is, I never believed in mass reach out. I'm slightly digressing. I always build on one-on-one relationships and really connecting with somebody because I believe what they do, and hopefully they believe in what I do, and those relationships are longer lasting versus sending out a mass email, because honestly, they're very transactional.
How many photos are in your book, and how important was the placement of the photos?
Yeah, so the photos were organized by dusk to night, because we kind of didn't really do a section. I want to say there are 40 photographs, big photographs, and there are equally 40 small photographs. One thing I would have liked, maybe it's not this edition, maybe a future edition, because we shot a lot more. I have a lot more pictures. The publisher told me 2 years before it was published that I was ready, and I told them, no, I'm not ready. Because from my perspective, I wasn't ready because I hadn't explored the subject from many different angles. Now, sadly, they never got to see the light of day, but they're there. They're there. Some of them made it in smaller form. And again, that budget came into play, the number of pages came into play, so you have to just have those kind of sort of middle ground. You have to come to a compromise, and maybe the third edition will have those. Sorry, long-winded answer, but.
No problem, I understand.
What percentage, if any, of the photos that you used in your book did you use maybe for your pitch deck, or did you use any photos initially kind of as you were starting up that you used for your pitch deck?
Sure. The first pitch deck had 6 photos I made. It was the donut hole, it was maybe pans and maybe a couple others. And then the others were just mood board, like picking and choosing from other stuff out there. So to give people a sense of what I'm going to approach, and this is how I'm going to approach it, and that's what I'm going to do.
A purely technical question. That third last photograph, we had to go over multiple days to photograph the same spot.
Which one? Oh, the Saga Motel?
That
Yes.
one, yeah. What was your technique there to make sure that all the images registered properly and had the same perspective?
So I shoot with the architect tilt shift lenses. So normally I'm shooting, combining images to get the perspective without not shooting wide angle. So it still looks like you're in front. I have to tell you, even though I shoot architecture, I'm not a gearhead. So excuse me if I'm saying something very basic. So I take a tilt shift lens and I shoot it, moving the lens to get a field of view, which you will not get by shooting into a single lens, right? So that's number one. I'm always obviously using a tripod, right? And I'm shooting from that same place different exposures for different components of it. Because although I'm not an editor, I think like one, so I know what pieces I need to make the picture. So even the car, when it was there, I think I have a frame with just the car. So just in case I needed it, I had it,
Did you mop the ground?
What's that?
You mopped the ground every time you went back? So you knew what it was?
Oh, no. So now I get your question. So when I went to one location, I finished that location. So I never...
The next day setting a tripod down, how do you get
No, if I go there one day and I didn't get the image, that was a wash. I would never use anything from that day. So I go back again and start the process again.
Oh, so all frames of that
Yes,
place were shot on one day.
correct.
You visited multiple days.
But there are multiple days to that one day, so it's a little bit of a crazy process.
Trying to figure out how you went back the next day and set a
No.
tripod.
I wish. No, I wish. No.
Makes a lot
No.
more sense, a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly.
A fascinating presentation, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we do have a few more minutes, but I do want to close out the stream and thank everyone who's been watching online. And one more time, let's do a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us.